set up in the early 90s. It arose out of a project initially developed by Charity Evaluation Services UK, and back then it seemed there were a lot of resources pouring into the community voluntary sector, particularly in Northern Ireland from EU funding and different sources. But with this funding came a demand for more accountability, as funders who are making these investments wanted to know what the impact or the difference these investments were making. But the issue was then, how are organisations going to be equipped to be able to provide this information? So initially CES, Charities Evaluation Service, and then CENI were established in Northern Ireland to provide organisations with this support to account for their funding, but also improve their practice. Now, as always and as now, there was two key questions around all this. One was, what was the most appropriate methods to actually capture the evaluative data being produced by voluntary and community organisations, particularly around the softer outcomes or those hard to measure qualitative differences that organisations made to civil society, which was a lot different from the kinds of outcomes provided by public sector organisations. So there was a question about what were the appropriate methods to capture the outcomes of the voluntary sector, and the second big question was, what was the capacity of the organisations to actually provide this data? So if you like, then CENI's job from the start has been about developing these methods that are most appropriate for the voluntary community sector, and secondly support the voluntary community sector to understand and use these methods. And again, I suppose CENI's underpinning philosophy has always been about enabling organisations to better understand and use valuation. It isn't just about us being experts who tell others what to do, but creating that expertise within the organisations themselves. So I suppose that was the founding, if you like, ethos of the organisation. So what has happened over the years since we've been established, I suppose, there's three key things that CENI have been involved in. One, supporting the voluntary and community sector, supporting their funders, and developing methodologies that bridge the needs of both. So where we kind of started from was to, do what we say. So we attempted to produce a baseline of need. So the first thing, the mid-90s, we did a baseline study of evaluation practice in the voluntary community sector around about 96, and this established what we seen as the key needs and what support the voluntary community sector required. This was actually subsequently updated, nearly 12 years later, around the time of the emergence of Inspiring Impact in the UK, and actually that informed the development of that initiative, which I'll talk about later. So I suppose taking those three themes, supporting the sector, well, self-evaluation support is the key thing that we started with. The voluntary sector back then in the 90s was growing, expanding, and there was resources there for organisations to develop their capacity, and through funding from the EU, from the Department of Communities, from Big Lottery and so on, we have managed to support some over 4,000 people and organisations over that period. And really, supporting the sector's ability to impact, to measure, or to define and measure their impact has been our key rationale. Because promoting self-evaluation for organisations allowing development as well as providing accountability to funders. I suppose the ultimate kind of conclusion of that was the Inspiring Impact programme, where having developed ad hoc resources over the years, by 2012-14, when Inspiring Impact came along, we were ideally placed to provide that infrastructure support, and indeed we became the lead organisation across the UK in developing and applying those methods. So as well as supporting the sector, the parallel process of that is actually supporting funders initially, funders were very keen that we just get out there and facilitate organisations to, if you like, better report what they did. And most funders were basically what they wanted was good evidence, or almost that organisations said what they did on the tin. They just wanted good quality monitoring data, and organisations were very keen that they had good news stories to tell. So basically it was about probity and PR, and people were happy with that. But as time moved on, it became clear that it needed to go a bit deeper, and particularly in the early noughties, there was a move from funders to begin to think about the broader idea of what are the actual outcomes and the differences that voluntary and community organisations make, as opposed to just for accounting for the funding that they receive. And this shift towards outcomes meant that funders had to get increasingly involved in the process, because if they were going to invest in organisations, they needed to know what outcomes they wanted from that investment. And this created almost like a shift in the dynamic and the thinking away from just evaluating organisations and projects to funders having greater understanding of what their programmes were about, what was the purpose of the programmes, which led then to the kind of third area of developing methodologies. But I suppose in supporting funders, beginning particularly Big Lottery was probably the first funder that we would work with and challenge to try and think of what the purpose of their programmes were, and we worked with a number of those. We also worked with the Department of Communities and DARD, the forerunner to DERA, and we worked with those funders to challenge them to think about what was the purpose of their funding, introducing concepts like logic models and theory of change, but through that then informing them what information then they needed from the organisations they actually funded. So by getting the funder to think about outcomes, that ultimately informed the design of monitoring and evaluation that they requested from organisations. So it wasn't just this separation that the funder gave funds and the organisation reported on outcomes. The idea was that the funder and the organisations themselves, it was the early ideas, it was the beginnings of co-design or co-production. And then really, laterally when in the last 10 years, particularly with the programme for government, which has been in draft now for a very long time, but still it provided the inspiration and the initiative, a shift away from just thinking about counting what people did to actually thinking about what were the broader outcomes at a very high level for the state, but then how that percolated down through various policies and programmes, and did provide a very useful backcloth to actually for CENI to actually take all our experience and all our expertise and to how we could fit that within the programme for government. So I suppose our biggest success, I would say, over the last 20 years is in facilitating that engagement at a policy level and at a programme level between funders and the sector around this whole notion of co-design and co-production for outcomes. And there's numerous examples of that. Most recently, I suppose, within the tackling paramilitary initiative for the Women in Community Transformation, CENI has worked with a co-design group made up of funders and organisations to actually co-design a programme, develop the outcomes that inform the commissioning of the programme, the ongoing reporting and ultimate evaluation. So it's a very useful template and a model that brings together all those elements of supporting the sector, supporting the funders, and developing a methodology that bridges the needs of both. Okay, so having outlined, if you like, the rationale for CENI's existence and the achievements we've made over the years, which there is lots of evidence of, and we spoke about that, particularly that idea of bridging the needs of funders and organisations, and how Inspiring Impact really helped to embed that. Looking forward, how is that to be sustained, and what are the challenges and dangers going forward? And given that we're in such an uncertain time, particularly around Brexit and funding and so on, there is challenges to the ability to sustain all those developments and all those successes. Indeed, we're probably looking at a period of maybe retraction and retreat from some of those achievements. Particularly around this idea of this partnership relation between the volunteering community sector and government, which I think is particularly under threat by things like Brexit, because as resources come under increasing strain, funders come under increasing strain, and if you like, that relationship between the volunteering sector threatens in some way the independence of the sector, because if it comes into that partnership as an equal partner, clear about its purpose and its outcomes, but that has to be compromised because funders have less resources and want to focus on their own service delivery needs as a priority, then organisations understandably have to compromise. And in that compromise, they lose some of their independence, lose some of the focus on outcomes, and we almost revert to type, where funders need just basically monitoring data on what things have been delivered, how many, how to, and we lose sight of the bigger picture of what the difference they're making and what the outcomes are. And to me, that is one of the biggest dangers going forward, despite all the strides and all the advancements that have been made. Because of these pressures coming down on everyone, we could end up losing some of that advance, threatening the independence of the sector and reverting to type, just recording outputs and counting things. Okay, despite the pessimism and negativity about some of the challenges that face the voluntary sector going forward, I have to say that the achievements and, if you like, the embedding of good impact practice that there has been over the last 10 to 20 years, particularly the last 5 years within Inspiring Impact, has maybe created a strength and created, if you like, a determination and a vision for the sector going forward, that it can stand up for itself. It does have its own independence. It is clear about what its outcomes are, and can negotiate this and impress this upon funders in programmes such as the Women in Community Transformation I've described, and others, is that while we are in this dangerous or difficult position of contracting resources and competition for funding, there's also a stronger sector that can actually liaise and engage with funders in a much more coherent way about outcomes, and we can see through co-design and co-production rise above some of these challenges and have a much more independent and cohesive sector going forward as a result of their impact capacity.